What's going on, everybody? Good morning. I know it's been a little while. I usually don't go very long without posting some kind of video to the channel. I think it's been like 3 days with no uploads because things are pretty peaceful right now. Things are chill. And the stuff that I could make a video about, for the most part, just it doesn't feel video worthy because there's nothing really going on, right? The rookies all signed. That was done a while ago. We've started OTAs, but we've only had one public session so far, so I've made the one video about that. Maybe we'll get more in a couple of days here when we have another one, but right now things are quiet. And I decided, it'd be a good time to take some time away from the channel. But I've been thinking lately about one particular thing when it comes to these Seahawks, and it's something that now that things are quiet and now that there's nothing active to occupy my thoughts, I kind of find myself coming back to it over and over again. And quite simply, it's asking the question, what kind of Ryan Grubb offense are the Seahawks going to get in 2024, at least as it regards the passing game? I think I know what we're going to get with the running game, but I'm trying to figure out what to expect from this passing attack. And to be more specific, I want to get an idea of what areas of the field is Ryan Grubb's offense going to attack specifically. So, in order to try to understand it, I wanted to take a look at Ryan Grubb's 5-year career as an offensive coordinator. He spent 5 years. I think there was a little bit more before then with Sioux Fall, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the 3 years at Fresno State and then the 2 years at Washington. That's the best data that we have on Ryan Grubb. And I wanted to see how his quarterbacks attack the field to get an idea of what we might be able to get here. So what I did is I went on to PFF and I pulled up their passing chart for the quarterbacks of Ryan Grubb's teams during this 5-year span. So Jorge Reyna for the first year, he was the Fresno State quarterback in 2019. Jake Haener for 2 years after that. And then Michael Penix Jr. for the last 2 years, of course. And I wanted to try to get a feel for what areas of the field does he personally like to attack. And when I say that, there's a difference between what the quarterback likes to do and what the coach likes to do. So let's take a look at some stuff here. So Pro Football Focus has a really cool chart that they have for most quarterbacks, pro and college, for specific years of their career, where they will actually show you how prolific and how good a quarterback is in each quadrant of the field relative to the line of scrimmage. So this is an example of one. This is Jorge Reyna in 2019. So what I did was I took all this stuff and I just wanted to simplify it down because I'm only looking at a couple things right now, and there are a lot of numbers here that are just going to kind of get in the way. So what I did is I took the chart and I boiled it down to basically 2 numbers in each quadrant: number of attempts and percentage of total attempts. And then I added those numbers up, those percentages up rather, for each level of the field. And then I did the same for each side of each, I don't know what you would call that, each side of the field, or middle of the field, as it were. So I just wanted to boil it down to where is the ball going in these offenses. And I've done the same for all the quarterbacks that Ryan Grubb has coached. So 1 year of Jorge Reyna, 2 years of Jake Haener, one of those years being half a year because it was the COVID year. So I took his and I simplified it down as well. I took his 2021, simplified it down. And then, of course, you have Penix the last 2 years for Washington, his passing chart simplified down. Penix, again, simplified down. So I'll just go ahead and focus in on the 5 charts that I did specifically. And let's try to see if we can figure out what's going on here, because to me, there is a clear departure in the way the offense worked last year under Ryan Grubb compared to the previous years of his career. So this first year, he's got Jorge Reyna as his quarterback, a guy that I don't really know anything about. He was the starting quarterback for, I believe, that entire season for Fresno State. And he was unremarkable, but fine. And I don't believe he ever made the NFL. So he's that kind of a college quarterback, right? So not somebody you would call overly talented, not somebody who's really tilting the field or moving the needle with their arm talent or their mobility or agility or anything like that, but a competent college quarterback. So you can see that in terms of depth, most of his attempts are going to the 0 to 10 yards down the field area. So you would call that short. So mostly short, but decent amount of intermediate passing, almost 22%. And then about a quarter of his passes are going behind the line of scrimmage. And most of the behind the line of scrimmage passes are between the numbers. Now, real quick here, I believe, I don't know the exact measurements, but I am aware that in college, the numbers are wider, just like the hash marks. So what between the numbers means in college is different from what it means in the NFL in the sense of what it tells you. It means the same thing in terms of like the definition, but it's telling you a different thing. However, you can see that almost all of it is inside the numbers. And that also goes for his overall attempts. Like he throws about 41% of his passes outside the numbers, a little bit more left than right, and then between the numbers is about 60%. So then we go to the next year when he got a quarterback who was a little more prolific in Jake Haener, a guy who would actually make the NFL, get drafted, I think, and actually be a quarterback that I was aware of going into that draft because he was a decent player. And this first year, which was only half a year, I think this was 6 games that Haener started, you can see that the short game became even more of a focus. 45% of Jake Haener's passing attempts in 2020 were short, 0 to 10 yards down the field. And they also went away from the behind the line of scrimmage passes, 13% versus close to 25% the previous year. So it became all about those 10 yards between the line of scrimmage and I guess you could say the first down marker if it's 1st and 10, right? And then the deep areas of the field are almost identical, 16.6% versus 16.2%. And the intermediate stuff goes up a little bit as well. So it kind of becomes condensed towards the short to intermediate game under Haener in this second year. And then you get to Haener's full year, his full year as the Fresno State quarterback. He's attacking down the field even less. It's now sub 15%. Behind the line of scrimmage does tick back up to about 21%. And he's also still using short and intermediate a lot. There's a little bit more stuff behind the line of scrimmage. That's really the main change here. And a lot of that comes out of the short passes. And as for the distribution of middle versus outside left or outside right, it actually flips a little bit where, first of all, between the numbers goes down a little bit. Excuse me. Goes down a couple of percentage points, and now he starts to favor the left side over the right side by a few percentage points. So not a huge difference here, but you can kind of see the same stuff here. They're definitely favoring the middle of the field, definitely favoring the short to intermediate game. Then you get to 2022. This was the first year in Washington. This was the first year with Penix. And I was very surprised by the numbers. So first of all, let's just start with the short and intermediate parts of the field. 41%, over 41% of Penix's throws in 2022 were short, 0 to 10 yards down the field. About 41.1. That's more than Haener in 2021. That's a little bit less than Haener in 2020, but again, that was the small sample size year. And that's significantly more than even Rejna in 2019. So That surprised me, and I watched every Washington game this year. Well, no, I missed one game because I was at a Mariners game during the game. But yeah, I watched every game except for that game. And you can see that the deep ball stuff really doesn't move at all. 16.7%. The year before with Haener, it was slightly less, but the year before that, it was actually almost identical with Haener. And the year before that, with Rejna, it was very, very close. So you're kind of starting to really get a sense for what Grubb seems to prefer. This is across three different quarterbacks. They're going to be attacking the short to intermediate area of the field 2/3 of the time, approximately. That seems to be what the flow is here. They're using screens behind the line of scrimmage a semi-decent amount. Over the 3-year period, if you took the average, it would probably be somewhere around the 17 or 18%. So there's a little bit of that. And then the deep numbers are pretty consistent. And the middle of the field stuff, Penix, and one of the narratives about Penix, and I find this to be very interesting, is that he doesn't use the middle of the field enough. Now, understand, again, middle of the field is defined differently in college because the numbers are further apart. So this doesn't mean this will be a one-to-one translation in the NFL. Not even close. I'll talk about that more in a second here. But you can pretty clearly see the focus of Ryan Grubb across these 4 years. And then let's take a look at 2023 here and see how things change. So 2023, Penix boosts his deep ball attacking rate to almost 23%. A pretty significant uptick over any previous year that Ryan Grubb was the OC. They're attacking the deep part of the field more than they're attacking the intermediate part of the field. Intermediate shrinks all the way down to less than 22%. Less than 22%. I mean, even the previous year with Penix, yeah, it went down, but it was still close to 25. You had 27 with Haener. You had 25.5 with Haener. You had 20. I mean, that's a pretty significant downtick. That's in line with what Rejna had in 2019 under Grubb, actually. That's actually very similar, almost identical. And there is this focus on short stuff, mostly stuff that is over between the numbers, again, for whatever that's worth. And that's still roughly in line with what you would expect, but you can kind of see how a pretty decent chunk of the playbook has come out of this intermediate stuff and gone to other areas, mostly the deep stuff as well. They're running about the same number of passes behind the line of scrimmage, but little bits get thrown into this deep area. And also, in this second year, we're seeing the middle of the field being utilized less. 51%, which that sounds like a lot, especially if you're an NFL guy. But in the college game, it's not really that much. 51.06% is probably one of the lowest rates of of most prolific college quarterbacks, because the between the numbers area of the field is big. So you can see a significant downtick in using between the number stuff from the previous year, which was the same quarterback. Now, 2021, it wasn't that far off, but it's still less. 2020, definitely less. And then, of course, 2019, way less. So I'm trying to put all this together and understand exactly what we're dealing with here. But the sense that I get is that in terms of the way in which the passing attack that Ryan Grubb runs attacks areas of the field, I kind of get the sense that what we saw in these first 4 years is probably more in line with what he feels comfortable with what he actually wants to do. And then 2023, you saw things change because he had a prolific big arm threat in Penix who wants to go deep more, so he pushed that button more often. And this is why I say when you're trying to figure out what the offense might look like for the Seahawks this year, yeah, you're going to want to watch some of the Washington tape, even the Washington tape from last year. And most people are doing that anyway. That was the year. That was the year Washington went to the title game. That was the year Washington won 14 games. That was the year they beat Oregon twice. They won a playoff game. They almost won the national. I mean, the game wasn't especially close, but they were competitive through most of that game. So I understand that most people are going to look at that and say, hey, that is Ryan Grubb, because that's the year where the team had the most success. But actually, I think the 2022 offense was a little more high scoring than the 2023 one. Now, that's situational. I'm not going to ask anybody to ascribe a ton of meaning to that, but there is something there, I think. And I think that if you're really looking for a feel of Ryan Grubb's offense, I would even more lean towards the 2022 tape, where it's more in line with what you saw when he had Jake Haener at Fresno State in terms of short, intermediate, middle of the field type stuff. So what I'm trying to get at here is, this is the stuff that I think is going to make this season work. Because while Geno Smith does have a good arm, he has a nice arm, he can throw the deep ball, and I'm sure that he will use it this season, I don't know how much faith we can have in our offensive line to hold up the way Washington's offensive line could hold up. They won awards last year for having the best offensive line in the country. They produced multiple good draft picks from their tackle spots, Fatanu and Rosengarten, and as a unit were considered relatively bulletproof. So I do think that you're not going to replicate that in the NFL, and you're especially not going to replicate it with this particular group of players, where, what are we doing at left guard? I don't know. Is it going to be the rookie who played right guard his whole career? Is it going to be the veteran who's looks pretty washed up? Is it going to be somebody we sign in free agency after June 1st? It's not great. So you're not necessarily going to be able to do what Washington even did in 2022, but especially 2023, which was the year they actually won some awards and had guys have career years like Fatanu, like Rosengarten. So this is kind of what I come back to, and this is what I think is going to make or break things for this offense. Can Ryan Grubb work well with what we have, and can he adjust to not having that really, really dominant offensive line? If you look at the previous 4 years of him as an OC, I get the sense that he can. Now, just for fun here, while we're here, I looked at the same data for Geno Smith. And keep in mind that this means very little when you're talking about between the numbers versus outside left or outside right. But it does mean a lot when you compare it across the depth of target, right? So this is 2022 Geno Smith. Half of his throws are short, little less than a quarter intermediate, little less than an eighth is deep, and then about 15% is behind the line of scrimmage. So pretty good spread. And then in 2023, it shifts a little bit. It's still about the same short. It's a little bit less intermediate, right? Because it drops about, what is that? 4%. By the way, forgive the crudity of these edits. I know that they're not aligned perfectly, but they serve my purpose well. And the deep stuff actually went up about 1%. And we saw a pretty significant uptick in behind the line of scrimmage stuff. It was like 3.5% more, which over the course of a season with hundreds of attempts does mean something. So the offensive line gets injured and never really gets their feet underneath them. So I think there's a little bit less of a focus on the intermediate stuff. They peel it back. They put most of it into behind the line of scrimmage stuff. That's where all the screens came from. By the way, the Seahawks were actually a decent screen team in 2023, so something worked. But just to kind of compare it to what Waldron did to what Grubb might do, you can kind of see that the deep stuff is a little bit less with Waldron than it will probably be with Grubb. But I'm not convinced it's going to be radically different here, because you look at the between the numbers stuff, right? You can see that Geno's using the outside parts of the field a lot. Like, this is 2022. This was his best year. He's using outside the numbers about 56%, little more than 56% of the time. Between the numbers, 43%. And then in 2023, that number actually went down to just over 40%. And he's using outside the numbers about 60% of the time. So, granted, the numbers are closer together. It means less. It doesn't mean the same thing than it did for the college quarterbacks. But you can see how the focus was kind of the same in some ways, I feel like. I feel like the areas that Waldron was focusing in on are not that different than what you saw from Grubb. Now, hopefully Grubb can be a little more timely with his play calls. That's the goal. It's not just enough to call good plays. You have to call good plays at the right time. But I just wanted to run these numbers through. All right. So I'm going to continue to try to look at this stuff, try to understand what we're getting into with Grubb. Going to continue to run numbers through, but let me know what you think about all this. Let me know if you feel like you know anything now that you didn't know previously. Let me know if you feel like these numbers illuminate anything. Because, again, to me, this is just the thing that I noticed. The 2023 under Grubb is an outlier. Suddenly, Penix is throwing deep significantly more than he did the previous year, and significantly more than any quarterback before that Grubb got to work with before. And I just look at that and I go, I think that is the aberration. I think that is just a product of Penix and the players that he was playing with being so good at it, they leaned into it. And obviously Penix is the guy making the throws out there. He likes to throw it deep because that's his strength. So he's going to lean into it when the opportunity presents itself. I'm not saying Geno doesn't have a good arm. He does have a good arm. I don't think it's as good as somebody like Penix. Penix has a, relatively speaking, golden arm. There are the other things about Penix that I wonder about in the pros, but his arm is beautiful. So I'm wondering if the Fresno State tape might paint a better picture of what we can expect to see this year than the 2023 Washington tape. All right, so this video went on way too long here. I usually like to make my videos 15 minutes, but I just had some data, wanted to talk through it, see if I could drill to the bottom of anything here. But let me know what you think. I'll see you guys later. Go Hawks. And yeah, just trying to establish some stuff here.